Real Islam, Orthodox Islam, is dangerous and toxic. The average Muslim is not a quote-unquote radical. They're not Orthodox. And the reason is because they know this book, the Quran, is violent. They know that it tells them that they're to kill Westerners, they're to kill infidels. They know that it tells them it's okay for them to pillage and murder and slaughter and steal and lie. They know that it says that, and they don't want to feel like bad Muslims, so they don't read it. They stay away from it. Islam, rather than restraining our darker impulses, it exacerbates them. And that's because Islam is a religion made by men, for men, not women. It's a religion made by men, for men, to enable men, to give justification to men to do everything that their evil male impulses would have them do. I think it's really important that we turn our attention to this issue. Now, I've spent my career taking on some of the cultural baddies, some of the most prominent intellectuals in the world, some of them in public debate, some of them behind the scenes. And I've come to realize that ideas define everything that we do. With an academic degree, you're trained to be a researcher and writer to the point that it's annoying. But I'm grateful for it. I'm not talking about books I've not read. I'm not talking about papers I've not read. Whether I agree with them or not actually isn't the point. There are quite a few books that I would read that I would say are actually evil books. Donald Trump, when he was in a divorce with his first wife, she said he has a copy of Mein Kampf next to his bed. I wish more people did. If the German people had bothered to read that book rather than just have it on their shelf, we might have avoided the Holocaust. If more people read the Quran, they'd be wiser to what Islam actually is, what they actually believe. If people bothered to read, as I have, the writings of Klaus Schwab and the various contributors to the World Economic Forum and the ideas that are driving the globalists, I read them because I want to understand their mentality. I cut out the middleman. I go straight to the ideology. Everything in your life is being defined by either your ideas or the ideas of the people around you. And each episode, we're going to be digging into a different idea that appears in the culture. This is Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. And today we're discussing Islam, a religion that Westerners, especially Americans, barely understand. And with the images of 9/11 having just disappeared from our television screens, virtually from the internet, they've also disappeared essentially from our consciousness, an event that should have awakened Americans to the perils, the real threat of Islam. They're gone. And children just simply aren't taught about these things anymore, the way that maybe my generation and those preceding us were taught about the dangers of communism, of socialism, of Marxism. Today, those threats remain, but we have an additional threat here in the West, and that, of course, comes in the form of Islam. And I want to be clear here, I am talking about Orthodox Islam, not really what we may label radical Islam. The so-called radicals are really just Orthodox believers. They're people who take the Quran, the Hadith, the life of Moses very, very seriously. Now, this has become very important because not only of what we're seeing in places like, say, Dearborn, Michigan, and certainly in the UK, and throughout Western Europe. Really, honestly, we don't hear that much about what's happening, for instance, in Western Europe because it's not English speaking. But in Britain itself, we do, because of the so-called special relationship. We read their papers. We get an awful lot of their pop culture, television shows and so forth that come to us. And we see what's happening. We see what Keir Starmer, their prime minister, is doing. But in the United States, we have been largely insulated from this. And that is because pre-Obama, the United States maintained a very strict immigration policy. We just simply didn't have that many Muslims in the United States. And it remains a very small percentage of people. However, under Obama, and then eventually, of course, Biden, as we've discussed many times on this show, just essentially opening our borders, but more than that, strategically targeting Muslim populations and importing them. That is to say, flying them into the country. And now we are seeing that they've been distributed, all over the country like little colonies, little potential terrorist cells. Now, I want to say at the beginning that I am not suggesting that all Muslims are terrorists or would be terrorists. However, I am asserting that Islam has a disproportionate number of adherents who believe that violence against non-Muslims is not only justified, but commanded. And it is commanded in their religion. Violence is not, anomalous in Islam. It is part of Islam. And that's something we're going to talk about. But also, it's become increasingly important because we see, individuals like, New York City Mayor candidate Zohan Mandani and Ilhan Omar, among others, but they're the most prominent faces politically of Islam in the United States. It's important, I think, that Americans not only understand something about this religion, but also that they understand that these political figures who fashion themselves as progressives, or in the case of Mandani, as just an outright, communist, it's important that Americans understand that they really aren't socialists. They really aren't progressives. They are first and foremost Muslims. And you see, Muslims have strategically decided that the path into the West, the means of conquest of the West, is not, at least at this stage, is not by being out and out, Muslims. Now, there is that element certainly in Western Europe, but in the United States, because most Americans do not have a favorable view of Islam, they recognize that it's best to remain below the surface with what it is that they really believe. And instead, they have realized that the path into the West is through socialism. And that is because the data shows that an increasing number of young people, particularly millennials and Gen Zers, have a favorable view of socialism, and that they can capture their hearts and minds this way. Now you say, well, that's a very devious tactic. Well, again, this is Islam. Islam maintains that violence on behalf of Islam is legitimate. It also maintains that lying on behalf of Islam, on behalf of Muhammad and Allah, that these things are justifiable means to advance the cause of Allah. So you need to understand that about Islam, and I think a lot of Americans simply don't understand that. But to that extent, Muslim politicians in the United States, like Ilhan Omar and Mandani, these are individuals who are fifth columnists. They are coming into the United States in order to be enemies within, to make the United States increasingly vulnerable to Islamic jihadists. And that's the goal. Now, they have a template for this. What they have been doing in Western Europe, all over Western Europe, has been very successful over the course of decades. And now we see, just as Vice President J.D. Vance pointed out, he said, Britain may become, when he was speaking there some months ago, Britain may become the first, Muslim nation that's a nuclear power. And people kind of scoffed at that. But anybody who's actually paying attention and isn't lying to themselves knows that it's true, that this is the direction that country is going. So I think it's really important that we turn our attention to this issue. In certain times, wise investors look for stability. Markets are overinflated, inflation remains a concern, and global tensions continue to rise. That's why many are turning to the safety of physical gold and silver. AlphaOmega Gold is a Christian-owned precious metals company known for honesty, transparency, and biblical stewardship principles. Their team help clients protect their investment with integrity and clear guidance, never pressure. Right now, AlphaOmega Gold is offering a free precious metals navigation guide to explain why owning gold and silver can be a smart, strategic hedge for retirement accounts and long-term security. Don't wait until economic shifts impact your future. So today, go and visit www.ao.gold/IHC or call 855-4AO-GOLD. That's 855-426-4653. Call today to learn how simple it can be to secure what matters most. My work over the course of, 35 years now, my work has had a twin focus, and the twin focus has been atheism and Islam. Now, atheism you're aware of because, both of those topics are enough to keep me busy, for several lifetimes. There's just so much there. But atheism, we started, if you look on our YouTube channel, you will see, you can go back and see some of our very high level debates taking on atheists. I made many references to this on this show, and those started in places like, Oxford University and Princeton and a variety of other places. We were taking on atheists. But so you see, atheism has since, we've just been tracking it, as I say, a bit like a hunter. We're just following its tracks. We have tracked it all the way to where it now resides in policy making, and that's in places like the World Economic Forum. And I'll be there again in January of this year. That at least is the plan, God willing. I intend to be there for that. But that's kind of the modern residence of atheistic thinking. It no longer is the left debating the existence of God. They've just kind of assumed that there isn't one, and they act accordingly. And the result of that is, as Romans 1 would tell us, Romans 1 verses 18 through 32, that the suppression of belief in God leads to a perversion of truth and a perversion of nature, so that you arrive at these crazy places where you say a man could be a woman and a woman could be a man. But it's also the kind of place where you arrive, where you come to the conclusion that human life has no intrinsic value, that there's no one to judge you in the next life for your actions in this one. And therefore, you treat human beings like the raw material, just as brick and mortar to be used for the building of their utopian superstate. And it's how you also get to people like Dennis Meadows, who we've discussed many times on this show, a World Economic Forum agenda contributor, who says we need to reduce the global population by 6 to 7 billion people. Yes, they actually say things like this. It's no conspiracy theory here. This is real stuff. We've shown you these videos many times of such interviews. And again, you can find it on this channel in previous World Economic Forum discussions that we've had here on Ideas Have Consequences. Islam, if we're talking about the West, being trapped in a kind of giant pincer movement, on the one hand, you have this atheistic, militant atheism, and then on the other side, you have Islam. And they're working in tandem. Sometimes this is referred to as the Red-Green Alliance, but they're working in tandem, and that is because they have a mutual enemy, Christianity. You see, Muslims understand, just like the left, sometimes better than Christians themselves do, or people who say that they're Christians, they understand that the West is based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. That is to say, a biblical worldview. And you may say, what do you mean it's based on that? I don't believe the Bible. I'm not a Christian. No, but if you grew up in the West any part of the West, unless you grew up in some place like Dearborn, Michigan, or some of the no-go zones in London, or Stockholm, or Paris, or Berlin. If you grew up in a traditional European or American household, you grew up with, whether you knew it or not, you breathed deeply of a Judeo-Christian worldview. That ethic has defined the parameters of your thinking. And the illustration I've often used in my life is someone like, say, my own father. My father didn't become a Christian until his deathbed. But I dare say if I'd have told my father that I was an atheist, I'm not sure he wouldn't have hit me. He had no sympathy with that particular worldview. He didn't want to go to church, and he would say, well, all Christians are hypocrites. Yes, true, as are all human beings. But Christians, of course, maintain that our only hope is through the person of Jesus Christ. Christians maintain that they aren't better than other people, but that they recognize, on the contrary, their own wretchedness and their need for the gospel, their need for the saving grace of Jesus Christ that comes through the confession of sins and the remission of sins through his blood, through his work on the cross. That's Christian belief. But my own father, while not believing that, at least not professing it, not confessing it, my own father certainly had a Christian worldview. He believed that human life was sacred. He did not think that children, say like Peter Singer, the Princeton bioethicist, whom we've done a couple of debates with, one in his hometown of Melbourne, Australia, and also where he has been a long-time academic at Princeton University. He didn't maintain that children had no more value than animals. He wouldn't have believed that. He would have believed, if in any God, he'd believe in the Christian God, the biblical God, not some other kind of deity. And he certainly believed in the value of the ethic that came out of Christianity. He would acknowledge that the rise of science, of art, of literature, of our forms of government, to say nothing of our own, moral and intellectual outlook, is all formed by Christian worldview. He would accept that, and many people do, even with my arguments with the late Christopher Hitchens, the famed atheist Molotov cocktail tossing journalist. Christopher Hitchens was that Hitchens, and he began to acknowledge this, that his own worldview was defined by a Judeo-Christian outlook. And you see, the left understands this about the West, and it's the reason they want to destroy it. It's the reason why, as we noted, I think, in the previous episode, that the Biden administration decided to designate Easter Sunday Trans Visibility Day or month or whatever. They targeted Christian holidays to do these things because the goal was to desecrate them as much as possible, to desecrate them. And you see, Muslims understand this too. Muslims have long since understood that the pillar that holds up the West, though it's a rotting pillar, has been the Christian faith. And by that I don't mean that the Christian faith itself is rotting. Rather, I mean Western belief in the Christian faith has been deteriorating for more than a century and a half now. Has been in serious decline, and as a result, it is becoming it's kind of like the West's immune system, which the antibodies that have defended us have been Christian in nature, that those have been slowly going out of the West, and as a result, the West, the body of the West, as it were, is becoming more vulnerable to disease. And those diseases might come from the left, or they might come from, Islam. That's where we find ourselves. And so it's important that we know something about this religion. And for me, atheism was very natural for me to focus on, because as I was in university, then eventually in graduate school, and then eventually teaching, both in university and at preparatory school, that's what I was encountering. I wasn't encountering Muslim academics. I was encountering, aggressively, militantly secular, atheistic academics who were hell bent on pushing that worldview and on twisting history, which of course is what I was teaching, to fit that paradigm. That's what they wanted. That's what they were doing. So when I left that world, that was something that I wanted to go after, and I wanted to address. Islam, however, I came to, in a much more organic way, and that is to say, it was chiefly through my travels. When I was a young man and I was traveling Western Europe, indeed, when I was studying in Britain, I was encountering, this is 35 years ago, I was encountering so many Muslims, and I was finding them so aggressive, incredibly aggressive. I've been used to most of my life to debate either public or private. Certainly, have done a number of high level debates, but I've never been afraid of debating, of defending my own worldview. But I found that these were individuals, who were quite threatening. They were individuals who would threaten to do you bodily harm. They want to bump up against you. They want to try to intimidate you. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is just anomalous. I've just run up against some guy here who's a jerk. And then I would begin to realize, no, this is a pattern. This is a program, a strategy that they're following in the West. And it's because they're so used to Westerners backing down. And we're gonna come to this in just one second. But having decided after I founded Fixed Point Foundation, and even before that, I decided, and Fixed Point was founded in 2003, so just a couple of years after 9/11. I had decided that I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about Islam. And so I put myself in the way of a man that I've had on this show, a very good friend of mine, a man I've known for, I don't know, maybe 30 years, Dr. Jay Smith. Now, if you haven't seen any of Jay Smith's videos, they're worth watching. Jay is a really clever guy, and his sole focus, where I might address a number of things on Ideas Have Consequences, Jay's sole focus is Islam. He is an Islamicist. By that, what is meant is that Jay is an expert in Islam, but he's a Christian. And so Jay went to London as a missionary in the early 90s, I think, and he decided he was going to, and he'd grown up in a Muslim country, but with folk Islam, which was different. It was friendlier. It didn't really take the life of Muhammad and the Quran and the Hadith particularly seriously. But when he got to London, Jay discovered a whole different type of Islam than what he had seen. And that is, again, what we call radical Islam. He was coming into contact with guys who would beat you up, who would threaten you, this kind of thing. And he went out. Now, before we introduce you to a little clip of him from an interview that I did with him, I don't know, last year or the year before, Jay told me that he would prepare to go and debate Muslims. And when he did, he would get beaten up both intellectually and physically because he realized he was ill prepared for it, that they came with Bibles carefully marked, and they would bring up, apparent, supposed discrepancies and errors and passages where Jay said, I didn't really have the answers. They would, bring up something and say, what about this? What about this? In your holy writing. And Jay said, I wasn't ready for that. And he said, I would just kept getting bruised and bruised and bruised. But, and this is a lesson for you. This is a lesson for all of you who are listening. I had a question this week for the Friday Five. If you sign up for the Friday Five, that's join.larrytaunton.com, join.larrytaunton.com. You could subscribe to the Friday Five. It's just questions that I'm answering every Friday, 5 questions that I respond to. And one of them this week dealt with, what do you say about all these young people who suddenly want to follow in the path of Charlie Kirk? And I addressed that question. I actually, wrote a short essay in response to it because a lot of people, I think some of this is an emotional reaction to what happened to Charlie. And that can fade very quickly. Enthusiasm will not get you through. And I also discover that sometimes with people like this as I say in the Friday Five, I won't dwell on it since many of you probably have read it, but sometimes people who want to do what I do for a living, or what Charlie does for a living, or what Eric Metaxas does for a living, or whoever, defenders of the faith, which is essentially what I am, what they see is the glamorous bits. They see me doing a show like this, or they see me on CNN, or on Fox News, or all the international travel. Looks like Indiana Jones or James Bond, and run-ins with the Egyptian secret police, and flying into jungles in South America, and racing across the Sahara Desert to escape Boko Haram and Fulani herdsmen militia. They see that stuff, and it looks really exciting. It looks really romantic. It looks glamorous, and they want to be a part of it. But then when you tell them what's required to get there, that I wrote, hundreds, maybe thousands of essays that no one ever read, much less published, that I had book ideas that were rejected, that I had, personal failures. I had public failures. I didn't do particularly well here or there. There are all kinds of things where they didn't go the way I wanted them to go, or thought that the way didn't go the way I thought they would go. And then I can see their shoulders begin to sag, as I'm talking about the years I spent in university, acquiring some knowledge, and then, getting beaten up like Jay Smith in order to be ready to do some of the things that I do now. Again, I see the enthusiasm wanes. I can see they don't want that, because they want the corner office now. That has been the case with so many young people with whom I've engaged. Well, what Jay did was the hard work. Jay realized, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to be a Charlie Kirk out there speaking on campuses. This time, Charlie Kirk was probably 3 years old, but you get my point. And so what did Jay do? Jay started going to their meetings, and he started listening to them. He started kind of what I do at the World Economic Forum. I just go and listen to them. I don't debate them there. I'm just pretending to be one of them and listening, because they speak more freely when they know no one is listening to them. And if I show up with a mic and with a camera and start interviewing people, the conversation changes. And these people are arrogant. And the same with Islam. Jay started going to their meetings almost like he was a guy considering conversion. And he began learning, and he began testing what he had learned against them. And guess what? He started winning in debates. He began pushing back. But you see, there's very little training for these kinds of things. And so I went to All Souls Church, Langham Place, London, which is, if you're familiar with John Stott, it's John Stott's old church in London. And I got to meet him once. What a grand old man. And how honored was I that I was there. We were there doing a very big event, and John Stott at that time was in a wheelchair, very elderly, and he took both of my hands. And as I'm telling him how much I appreciate his work, he stops me to say he is so grateful for the work that I do. Wow. I mean, what a remarkable man that he was. He's long since passed away, but you can find his books, and they're all definitely worth reading. But in the back of Old Souls, Jay would meet. He doesn't do this anymore because he's left the UK. He was there for 25 years, and he's now back in the United States. But in the back of Old Souls, Jay had been recruiting a team of people who were prepared to go with him down to Speaker's Corner at Hyde Park, London, where the radicals, the real radicals, engage. The debates that I've done on CNN and CNN International and Al Jazeera against Muslims, those are the puppy dog Muslims. Those are the ones that the left finds and trots out to give a deceptive view of what Islam is. They're people who say they believe in free speech and all these kinds of things, which Muslims absolutely do not. But the radicals, I mean, the real Muslims, they meet at places like Speaker's Corner and Hyde Park. And this is where there's a rich tradition of free speech and where people go down there by the hundreds to have debates. And Jay was telling me I'm having a very hard time finding men who are willing to go with me down there and debate these Muslims. And I said, Jay, I will go. And so together we went down there. I've debated with Jay would go down there every Sunday, of course, because he lived there. But whenever I was in town, I would go down there with him. And I suppose I probably debated down there 3 or 4 times some of these radicals who will bump up against you, try to intimidate you, and you just kind of have to push them back and just not be intimidated by them. Yeah, and in fact, you almost have to be aggressive. By that, I don't mean behaving like a jerk, nor do I mean, hitting people, physically, though I have no problem with that if you're defending yourself. But if you are easily intimidated, you will wilt. And that's why Jay said he was having a hard time with men. He said, I bring, men down there to debate these Muslims. And at the first sign of a threat, he says you can just see them. You can just see them, close up and eventually, slink off into the crowd. So we would go down there, we debate them. Now, I want you to watch this little video of Jay talking about what Islam really is. Now, this is from an interview that I did with Jay. You can find it on my YouTube channel. I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, but it's a very, listen to the full interview. And we're going to link all this stuff that I'm mentioning today in the show notes. Some of you in the YouTube comments have said you wish that I would tell you what the books are up here on my table. And by the way, and I did. So I have, I've sent to my team the links. I don't do any of that stuff. They'll put the links up there for you. But we have up here, William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Here we have a book here on Muslim slavery. That is to say, the slave trade that involved white people, which is something that you almost never hear about. The book is called White Gold. I have a carefully marked Quran up here, and then I have Karl Popper's The Open Society, which if we have time, I will mention today. But we're also going to link several articles that I reference here that I've written for everyone from USA Today to the American Spectator, so that you can go and read those articles as you like, and we'll link the interview with Jay Smith. Now, listen to what Jay has to say here, because it's actually quite important.
There's no book that teaches you. There's no school that you can.
Isn't it astonishing? I mean, that it's, as you say, will in 30 years be the largest religion in the world, and yet there's almost no Christian preparatory material on this stuff. But anyway, continue.
And the reason why is because they don't want you to go polemical in your seminaries and your Bible schools, because you get death threats. Yeah. So this is the only religion that will kill you for what you say. The atheists aren't going to kill you. They're not even going to threaten you. They're going to sit there and laugh at you.
They just try to sue you.
That's right. Or they'll harass you. Or
yeah, exactly.
They'll use ad hominem, but that's about it as far as they go. The Muslims will kill you. And you can see this with Salman Rushdie. Look, they're still trying to kill him just for writing one book.
Okay. This is a religion that will kill you. Jay knows what he's talking about here. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I've been speaking to Western audiences, chiefly American audiences, where I'll say something like that, and you get some lefty who will, give you this smug, condescending smile as though I'm making something up. And it is because people like that, first of all, I like the way Malcolm Muggeridge put it, also a great, defender of the Christian faith. Malcolm Muggeridge said this in his autobiography, 2-volume work. He says, people believe lies not because they're plausibly told, but because they want to believe them. They want to believe them. Most people will not believe something they just simply do not want to believe. It's why I say that, it's easy to convince people of their victimhood. And it's because most of us, we want to believe that the things that haven't gone right for us in our life are somebody else's fault. And sometimes they are someone else's fault, but not all of it. Not all of it. It's easy, and Marxism, understands this. It's easy to convince people of their victimhood. You can tell them that this is someone else's fault. But there are other lies that we're prepared to believe no matter what the evidence says. And we've all seen this writ large across Western society in recent years, if you didn't notice it before. How often people are willing to believe lies that are being pushed upon them by those with a sordid agenda. And when it comes to Islam, there are many people in the West who don't want to believe this. They will say that it is the religion of peace. And when you mention 9/11, they just treat that as though that was some kind of anomalous event. But then when you point out, well, there was also the 7/7 subway bombers. There was a bombing of the USS Cole. There was the, Charlie Hebdo attacks, the Bataclan attacks. There was the Westminster Bridge attack, and on and on. And just in recent days, attacks in Britain. And they act as though these things, and it's because they don't want to believe it. Don't waste your time. Just a little bit of advice to you as you engage the world, and I hope you are. If you're a Christian, you're commanded to do so. If you're not, you're a Christian, you are wise to do so. You should be engaging people around you, not only to learn, but to persuade. And we want to persuade people when they don't believe the truth, when they bought into a lie. We ourselves want to be persuaded when we've believed a lie. I want people to punch. I test my ideas against intelligent, educated people because I don't want to believe a lie. And if someone can punch a hole in something that I believe, that's for my own good. Then I go, oh, okay. Maybe I shouldn't push that idea. Maybe I shouldn't believe that. But you see, these are individuals who close out the world to these things. They just simply act like they didn't happen. We've seen it most recently with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. How much discussion has there been about the radicalizing of American youth on leftist mainstream networks? Is it fair to say none? I mean, we saw how early on they tried to frame the shooter, Tyler Robinson, as a MAGA guy, which makes, of course, no sense at all. And it was a lie. And as that lie was exposed, the left just went silent. They just ignored it because they prefer to believe a lie. Again, as Muggeridge puts it, people believe lies not because they're plausibly told, but because they want to believe them. And as Jay points out here, Islam, real Islam, Orthodox Islam is dangerous and toxic. And I want to illustrate this for you. I was trying to think of the best way for me to illustrate this for you. And by the way, I discussed this. I don't think this book of mine is linked in show notes, but my book, The Grace Effect, which got the least visibility, is actually my favorite book. It is of the ones that I've written. That book contains some of what I consider to be my original ideas, academic ideas, but are expressed in a non-academic way, a real flesh and blood way to help you understand the culture. And one of those ideas is this: if you believe, if you believe that human nature is the same the world over, that it doesn't change from Japan to Iraq to the United States or Canada, that human nature is the same the world over, and every intelligent person I know does believe that, then we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we arrive at a place where North Korea or Iran is so intolerable, such an intolerable places to live, and there are other places in the world that are far more tolerable, that are much better, where human life is respected, where private property is respected, where there's a greater appreciation for and respect for the law. How do we explain that if human nature is the same the world over? Well, it's easily explained by the fact that societies are defined by the ideas that they adopt. So human nature, if we think of a human being, or these little glasses that I have here, represent, say, a society, if that society adopts, let's say, Christian ideas, you notice that's clear. Human nature is dark. But you see, some ideas that we absorb, that we fill our society with, they restrain our darker impulses. Does that mean that I, as a Christian, am not capable of doing very wicked things? Well, of course not. Indeed, I have done very wicked things as a Christian, as we see throughout the Bible with numerous, Christian figures, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But I'm not as wicked as I might otherwise be. I like the way Evelyn Waugh put it, the author of Brideshead Revisited, when someone said to him he was such a wicked man. And he replied, and just imagine how much worse I would be if I were not a Christian. So we believe that the Christian faith restrains our darker impulses. And that's because it sharpens, the law is written upon our hearts. The law of God is written upon our hearts, Romans 2:15. And it speaks to us through the Holy Spirit, through our conscience, and serves to give us feelings of guilt or remind us of things that we shouldn't do. That's why Christian societies look so different from, let's say, atheistic societies. Atheistic regimes, secular regimes, killed 150 million people in the 20th century alone, which is more than all religious wars from all previous centuries combined. So what is Islam then? Islam, rather than restraining our darker impulses, it exacerbates them. And that's because Islam is a religion made by men, for men, not women. It's a religion made by men, for men, to enable men, to give justification to men to do everything that their evil male impulses would have them do. You want to RAPE? It's a word apparently Lawrence says you can't say on YouTube. You want to do that? If it's done to non-Muslim women, if it's done to advance the cause of Allah, is perfectly justified. You want to have multiple wives? No problem. You can do that. It's justified in that religion. You want to burn, steal, destroy, pillage? It is justified by Allah. You're allowed to do that. Conquest of unbelievers, destruction of them and their property is justified. Violence is justified. So when you hear, particularly after 9/11, we were all hearing that Islam is a religion of peace. It was the West who was telling us that. It wasn't the Muslims who were saying it, at least not chiefly. The George W. Bush administration went out of their way to say this. It's a religion of peace. And those people who are committing violence do so in conflict with their stated religion. That is false. That is false. If I say that I'm killing on behalf of Jesus Christ, I'm lying, because that is inconsistent with Christian teaching. But that's not true of Islam. If you're killing on behalf of Allah, if it's conquest of a, quote unquote, unbeliever, infidel nation, then you're justified in doing it. And that is because that's the way the religion works. And by the way, we as Christians, are more like, we're more like that. We're somewhat polluted. We're not perfectly clear. But that's because of our human nature. That's not because of the Christian faith. The Christian faith is in itself evil. It is poured into evil people, and thus serves to, again, to restrain us from all the evil things that we might do. But you see, Islam is justification to all those things. And it's important that you understand this. So trying to say these things to Westerners, which I was doing pre 9/11, my interest in Islam predated 9/11. And whenever I would try to speak on Islam, I found that it fell on deaf ears because people were kind of like, Larry, that's a problem over there. That's not a problem for us here. I mean, the left is a problem, but Islam isn't a problem. But then after 9/11, suddenly Americans were listening in a way that they weren't listening before. But even then, only briefly. And that's because of a concerted campaign from the left to make those images disappear. And if you will recall, the conversation became about the evils of religion, and one religion in particular after 9/11, Christianity. Think of that. Think of how absurd that is. That's when all of our debates, started taking place. And that's because after 9/11, there were a spate of anti-religious books, but really anti-Christian books, bestsellers that made guys like Dawkins, like Hitchens, like Daniel Dennett, like Sam Harris, rock stars. They capitalized on that. But guess what religion, with the exception of Hitchens, that they really didn't say much about? Islam. Their target, and that's because they're all leftists, their target was Christianity. And that's when I found myself, doing interviews on this kind of issue. And my standard line was to say it wasn't Amish, it wasn't Presbyterians who flew those planes into the sides of those buildings. It was Muslims. And in doing so, they were not acting inconsistently with their religion. On the contrary, they were acting perfectly consistently with that religion. So suddenly, after 9/11, Christians find themselves having to defend their religious belief as though they were the ones who had committed this awful terrorist act. And again, that's because of that red-green alliance. That's because the left, post 9/11, ran interference for Islam. They defended Islam. They changed the conversation away from Islam and made it about the Christian faith. Then came Rotherham. Unfortunately, most Americans know nothing about Rotherham, and you can read about this, and we'll link this in the show notes. I don't have the book up here. I may have it sitting somewhere here in the studio, but then came Rotherham, and I've written about it extensively in my book, Around the World in More Than 80 Days. And again, you can find that on Amazon and fine booksellers everywhere. Please buy it in bulk. Share it with your family members. Give it away as Christmas and birthday present. But in that particular book, the chapter on England or on the UK, I tell the story of Rotherham. And if you're not familiar with the Rotherham Scandal, I'm going to quote here from my own book. Times journalist Andrew Norfolk, not the New York Times, that's the London Times. Times journalist Andrew Norfolk reported, quote, confidential police reports and intelligence files that reveal a hidden truth about the sale and extensive use of English children are exposed today. They show that for more than a decade, organized groups of men were able to groom, pimp, and traffic girls across the country with virtual impunity. Offenders were identified to police but not prosecuted. A child welfare expert speaking under the condition of anonymity said that agencies' reluctance to tackle such street grooming networks was, quote, the biggest child protection scandal of our time. The Times has published several articles about a pattern of crime across northern England and the Midlands involving groups of men, largely of Pakistani Muslim, they don't say that here, Muslim heritage, and the abuse of white girls aged 12 to 16. The child welfare expert speaking under condition of anonymity was Jane Senior, a Rotherham social worker who detected a pattern in the at-risk adolescent girls with whom her agency dealt, mostly from broken homes and in-state foster care. The files she surreptitiously delivered to Norfolk revealed that since 1997, local authorities knew about but ignored the industrial-scale
and trafficking of no less than 1,400 British white girls. Now that number is somewhere near 250,000, and almost no one has been prosecuted. Almost no one has been prosecuted for this scandal. Again, this hit the London Times in 2012. I recall talking to a reporter about this, interviewing a reporter about this in London about, 2014, 2015, about this very thing. And what she told me, and she's someone that you're going to see a clip from here in just a moment on a different topic, Melanie Phillips, who writes for the Times of London, among other publications. But Melanie said when they first published it that the articles did not speak of Pakistani men. It's mostly Pakistani men with some Afghans, all Muslim. But due to political correctness, the Times editors required them to say something more general and not use Muslim or Pakistani or Afghan, but say Asian men, which is, of course, even more politically incorrect, because what it did was it smeared a whole host of nationalities, of people groups that had nothing to do with this. So understandably, Sikhs were outraged by this. Koreans, Chinese, Indians, others were outraged by this and said, no. It wasn't Asians. It was Afghans and Pakistanis. And all of them shared a single religion, the so-called religion of peace. That's what happened. And you see, this got almost no press in the United States. You see, when you were hearing about so-called racism in Britain at this particular time, it was all focused on poor Meghan Markle. Poor Meghan Markle. She is the subject of such terrible racism in the British family. Meanwhile, British white girls, notice that that's what the report says. British white girls were being raped on, according to the Times, I quote, an industrial scale. And the way this worked was that you had restaurant owners, cab drivers, some police, and various others all working together to groom these girls, to drug these girls, to move these girls around the country and sell them. Sell them. So what did they do? How did it work? Muslim boys, often pretty boys, prior to, really taking on, a heavy beard or something like this, prepubescent, would take candy and money and other things, and they would find these girls are adolescents, they're not adults, and they would romance them, tell them how pretty they were, how much they liked them, they loved them, offer them things, buy them things. And these girls, being normal girls, they thought here's a handsome boy who's very interested in me. And then what happens is they would record them having sex with them, or they would drug them and record them having sex with an adult male, a dirty old man, and they would show it to them. And they would say, this goes on the internet. This goes to your parents. Show them what a whore you are. If you ever tell anyone about what happened. And then the girls were used again and again and again. Taken to a home or a business or somewhere, and men would line up and pay to go and have sex with these children. And they were children. You need to understand that. And by the way, Rotherham, as it turns out, was just simply, as I say, the one roach you see. I have a rule in my house. If I see one roach, it means there are 100 in the wall that I haven't seen. And it's ready to just take a flamethrower to the whole place. Rotherham was the one roach that they were seeing. What has since been uncovered is that there were similar sex gangs. And again, this is organized crime and still operational, not only all over Britain, but all over Europe. But because of political correctness, the left has done nothing. You see, these girls were failed by multiculturalism, by open borders. They were failed by their governments, by their police forces, and often even by their parents to protect them. What a tragedy. What an absolute tragedy. Again, it's Rotherham, Rotherham. And I also want to say this. Guys, you can help us on this show by hitting the like button, by subscribing, and by sharing this show, because week after week, Lawrence Fox, with whom I do another show called WTF, World of Taunton and Fox, Lawrence is always telling me, and Lawrence is British, he's a British actor. Lawrence always says, you say every word. I mean, he will swear like a sailor. Those words are all acceptable. But he says the words that I use, such as references to the religion of peace and to the activities that they're actually doing in telling the truth regarding these things, to say nothing of the left's sordid agenda. He says, whenever you mention all that stuff, he said, YouTube just goes, just chokes it. Just chokes it. Just puts its foot directly on your throat to prevent it getting. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know any other way to do it. Because the censorship, which YouTube has admitted to quite recently, Google has admitted to recently, we already knew they were all doing it. It's just a matter of them admitting it. The reason they censor and they put out some of these words is it's their way of saying these are topics you can't talk about. And I refuse to be censored in that way. I'm going to talk about the things that I feel the Lord is leading me to talk about. And if I'm censored, I'm censored. If that's what happens, that's what happens. But it's important that you know the truth, that you understand the issues that we're dealing with. And this is one of them. So I can't talk about Rotherham without talking about what Rotherham was about. You have to know that. And by all means, please, but read about this scandal and various others related to this. But again, you'll find it in my book, Around the World in More Than 80 Days. The question becomes, how does this, and by the way, why white girls? Because these were not Muslim girls. Some of these girls said that their, again, a word I'm not allowed to say apparently, were quoting the Quran as they were raping them. And they were telling them they're trashy white girls. You see, because they're not Muslims. Islam says you can do that to non-Muslims. It's not to say there aren't any white Muslims. I debated one on CNN International, a hippie from North Carolina, and had no understanding of the religion she espoused. But as yet, they're fairly rare. So these were not Middle Eastern girls. These were not black girls. These were white girls. They were deemed to be, as this book calls them, white gold. They were deemed to be valuable, desirable, and fair game. And you may think, well, why were they not going after adult women? Listen, Islam has a strong history of homosexuality and pedophilia. They do. And that's because, again, it's Romans 1. Suppression of the truth about God, as Romans 1 says, doesn't mean necessarily that you're an atheist. It just means suppressing the truth about the real God. You may believe in another one, a false one. Man's going to worship something. But thank God for, and I only mentioned Jane Sr.'s name here. You know, she spoke, as I say, under anonymity because she was later doxxed.
her name was, put out there. So her name is now all over the place. But thank God for her courage. She was the social worker who was noticing the pattern with all of these girls. And finally, we started getting these girls to tell the truth. But when she sent them to the police would say, yeah, you're not the first one this happened to. Sorry. They didn't do anything about it. And to this day, almost nothing has been done about it. And this also applies to terrorism. So how did it happen? Well, first, there were massive demographic changes in Rotherham and throughout the UK and throughout Europe. But let's just look at Rotherham itself. According to the 2011 census, Rotherham's population of 257,000 saw a significant change from the 2001 census. First, those self-identifying as Christians dropped between 2001 and 2011 by 13.2%. So you see, again, this is the argument here that with the decline of Christianity, there's a corresponding rise in barbarism. Barbarism, both from the left and from Islam, takes many forms. And that's because Christianity, as even Richard Dawkins, I got him to admit, would say, Christianity has served as a bulwark against things that are much, much, much worse. And now that bulwark is eroding, and it's eroding rapidly. So that's one of the things that happened. Between 2001 and 2011, a drop in the number of people who self-identified as Christians, 13.2%. Second, the Muslim population increased in that same period by how much, would you guess? 10%? That would be a huge increase of 10%. 15? 78%. The Muslim population of Rotherham increased by 78%. And ladies and gentlemen, again, it's the one roach you see. It's happening all over Europe. And it's exactly what the left wanted to do to the United States. We can only hope that it's not too late, that the mass deportations, by the way, I had to see, I thought this was funny. I cracked myself up. I see this image of the Pope blessing ice. That is frozen water, a big chunk of frozen water. He's got his hand on it, he's blessing it. And I thought, there was a lot of outrage, regarding this, or a lot of consternation because it just looked weird, and it is weird. But I thought, maybe he's symbolically blessing ICE, I-C-E. He's blessing mass deportations. Of course he wasn't, but I was thinking, maybe that's really what he's doing. But all that said. So first, how did this happen? It happened by massive demographic changes in Rotherham and throughout Britain and throughout Europe. That's how it's happening. Second, because of a toxic multiculturalism. Now, I want you to take a look at this stupid. At first, you think this has got to be a Saturday Night Live sketch, a tasteless Saturday Night Live sketch. This couldn't possibly be real. We've shown this on Ideas Have Consequences before, but it bears repeating. But it is real. And this is a video that was put out to educate Muslims about, because you see the Rotherham scandals, industrial skill rapes, what did the left say regarding them? It's just cultural. It's just a cultural misunderstanding. That's what it is. And if they knew that, that British white girls, adolescents, don't like this, then they wouldn't do it. So they put out this ridiculous video. Let's watch this. These medical personnel.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
Stop, don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. That is meant to be taken seriously. It's this toothless, milquetoast, multicultural idea that all human conflicts are a result of misunderstandings. And that's because leftists, not believing in God, they have no doctrine of evil. They do not have a doctrine of evil. And Muslims, the people who are committing these crimes had to watch this in disbelief and then just laugh and say, these people don't get it. This isn't going to stop us from doing what we want to do. These people are so stupid. They're just easy pickings for us. And of course, they are. It isn't a misunderstanding. And I should also add that the left, because they don't believe in God, they don't believe in an absolute right and wrong. You see, as Christians, we do believe that there are things that are cultural. Scripture even talks about that there are some things that are okay for you to do, but maybe you don't do them in front of other people who believe that they're wrong. Maybe, by virtue of their upbringing or their culture. There are some things like that are cultural. There are other things, however, that are absolute. And by that we mean that they are timeless and they're universal. Rape is one of them. Abortion is another. The mutilation of children is yet another. Disregard for the rule of law is still another. But see, the left doesn't believe that. They believe that the rules are just simply the ones that the government makes up. And as a consequence, they arrive at a place where this industrial scale trafficking of British white girls was treated not as the incredible evil that it is, but that it was treated instead as just a cultural faux pas. Just a cultural faux pas. So, what do? They set out to understand Islam. To better understand it, maybe we just need to have, some coffee sessions together. We need to get both sides together and have a chat, because then we'll realize, okay, so you guys don't like it when we blow you up. You don't like it when we stab you in the streets. You don't like it when we shoot you with machine guns. We didn't know that. Thank you for telling us. And it resulted in this. The left is giving away the store and handing the keys to Muslims. Here we have a video. This took place about 5 years ago, and it's by a woman named Medina Javed. She's a Muslim woman who was invited to read from the Quran at St. Mary's Cathedral in Glasgow, Scotland. And let's watch just a little clip of this. Look at the bishops as they're sitting there watching her reading from the Quran in a cathedral, a Christian church. This, it was believed, would facilitate mutual understanding. It would facilitate appreciation for one another. It would bring about a really multicultural society where everyone just got along. But you see, you can't get along with people who don't share your values. The traditional American melting pot has always been based on the idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And you cannot allow people to come into your country who do not believe in those self-evidential truths, such as that we're all created equal by God and we each have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is not what this religion believes. And if you have Muslim friends who say differently, it's because they're really not Muslims. I have Muslim friends, very good ones. But thank God they don't take their religion very seriously. They're what I call cultural Muslims. They don't read the Quran because they don't want to. And I remember some years ago going to hear a Muslim. I'll call him asylum seeker, but in a good way. This was a Muslim who had become a Christian. His father was a very high-ranking individual in Syria. And he had become a Christian over the internet, listening to lectures and debates and then, through conversation with other Christians. And when he announced to his father that he'd become a Christian, his father was duty bound to murder him, to kill him. This is an honor killing. You're supposed to do this. And he said, I was leaving from the house. He's shooting at me and hitting the door frame. Now, he believes his father wasn't really trying to hit him, but rather was creating a narrative whereby he could say to the clerics, well, I did try to kill him. I just didn't hit him. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But this guy came to the United States. He's living under a fatwa. That is to say, he's living under a death sentence. And I was invited with another group of people to anonymously, quietly go and hear him speak in this underground, session. Nothing public about this. And so I did go to listen to him speak. And one of the things he said that I thought was so insightful, and I've since heard many other Muslims that I know say this, he says the average Muslim is not a quote unquote radical. They're not Orthodox. And the reason is because they know this book, the Quran, is violent. They know that it tells them that they're to kill Westerners, they're to kill infidels. They know that it tells them it's okay for them to rape and pillage and murder and slaughter and steal and lie. They know that it says that. And they don't want to feel like bad Muslims, so they don't read it. They stay away from it. And they hope that they're never put in a situation where they are expected to do those things. Again, they're sort of culturally Muslims. Their family is Muslim. They have adopted the accoutrements of Islam without really adhering to the heart of it. And that's why many Muslims living in the West, or indeed in many other parts of the world, live in peace with the people around them. But you see, the way they become radicalized, and hence the reason such people are still dangerous because they're easily radicalized. Muslim clerics, often the Sunnis anyway, are often funded by the Saudis. They send them into these kind of Muslim missionaries. They send them into parts of Africa and Asia and into the United States. And what you begin to see is that Muslim neighbor of yours who dressed like you did and who went to the same movies and whose kids went to the same schools and you guys, enjoyed, a beer together. You begin to slowly feel that relationship is being severed. And that is because these clerics come in and they wag the stick, literally. And they begin to putting a guilt trip on these Muslims. You're a bad Muslim, and Allah is going to punish you for your wickedness because you are not a good Muslim. You are not doing the things that you should do. And over time, what begins to happen is that friend of yours, his wife, she begins to disappear, literally. Before she dressed the way your wife did. But now you start seeing her, putting on the burqa and the hijab and these kinds of things. And before all that's left is just a slit of her eyes. This has happened all over Africa. All over Africa. It's happening in Western Europe, and it is happening in parts of the United States. Again, our Muslim population isn't that big, but you got to bear in mind, these people breed like rabbits. White people are not reproducing. I don't have the data on that in front of me, but just think about it. They just aren't. There's been a war. The secular left has made war on the family. They convinced women that being wives and mothers was a terrible thing, and that self-fulfillment would be found in some unfulfilling career. So they abandoned the home. They abandoned marriage. They abandoned childhood. The data all bears this out. And even when they did get pregnant, how many of them were killing their children through abortion? Muslims have noticed this too. And you have perhaps seen instances, some of these videos, appearing on social media, where Muslims are openly saying, we are going to breed you out of existence. And that's because a Muslim man who has allowed 4 wives and an endless number of concubines, they're having not 3, 4, 5 kids, not 10 kids. In some instances, we're talking like 50, 75, and 100 children. I kid you not. This is particularly prevalent in Africa, and it's starting to appear in Europe. This is a very real thing. Listen to what this Muslim cleric, this British Muslim cleric, had to say, and he's telling you the truth. Let's listen to him.
Allah is not shy of the truth. We don't say that Islam is here to live, to coexist with lots of different religions and all of us can just hold hands and be friends. This religion was sent to dominate the world. It was sent to be superior, to extinguish the light of every other religion and to be superior to it. But we're not shy to say it, and we don't find that to be something that we should be shy to say. That this religion has been sent to dominate, to wipe out, to take out every other religion, to eclipse it, to be superior to it, to have the people leave every religion and to accept Islam. And if that requires fighting to achieve it, then it requires fighting to achieve it. Because the greatest purpose for which jihad was legislated is to make the word of Allah the highest and the word of those who disbelieve the lowest.
Notice what he said. Islam was sent to subjugate, to dominate, to annihilate everything else and make it subject to Islam. And that is because that's what Islam is. That's what Islam is all about. That is what they're taught. That's what their own scriptures tell them that they are to do, that they're to make the whole world for Allah. That's the goal. They understand the West very well. The misunderstanding is really only on one side, and that's the side of Westerners, be they Christian or otherwise. People just simply not understanding this religion. But you see, Muslims understand what the West is, and they hate it, and they want to destroy it. The passage that the woman was reading from, Miss Javed was reading from, she's reading in Arabic. And she has carefully selected a passage that speaks of Jesus not as the Son of God, but as one who is subject to Muhammad, to Allah. So she was given the platform to come into the church to read from the Quran. And what did she do? That in of itself is a desecration, to read from a demonic book. But then to come in and to claim it for Islam, to say, no, the God you worship is a false God. I wonder how many Muslim clerics permit the reading of scripture in their holy places. I think the answer to that would be none. She's reading it in Arabic, and they don't even know that she's telling them your God is a false God. So while they think that this is a time of mutual understanding, we'll all just get along, she's come to say, no, you people worship a false God. I would say exactly the opposite. Meanwhile, did you know that in the EU that it is against the law? You can go to jail, yes, punishable by jail, to insult the so-called Prophet Muhammad. That's what the EU has done. It's put barriers around Islam to protect Islam, doing nothing of the kind where the Christian faith is concerned. Then we have Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo, January 2015, that's where 17 people were murdered. Charlie Hebdo, if you don't remember or you're too young to know it, Charlie Hebdo was a magazine. It was a kind of a cartoon, mad magazine sort of thing, but it was much more graphic. It lampooned various cultural and political issues. Nobody was safe from the cartoonists at Charlie Hebdo. They made fun of everything and everybody. The magazine lampooned Muhammad. Now, anybody knows anything about Charlie Hebdo knows this. What is little known is that between 2005 and 2015, the magazine devoted 38 covers to obscene and offensive depictions of religion or religious figures. Of those, 21 were aimed at Christianity and only 7 targeted Islam. So only 7 covers of Charlie Hebdo dealt with Islam. That's 1.5% of their total covers, not just religious ones, but total cover topics. Yet those 7 covers netted 2 terrorist attacks and 17 people dead. Were Christians as violent as Muslims, there would have been no less than 6 Christian attacks on Charlie Hebdo. And in fact, there were none. Now, according to the Global Terrorism Index, there's been a 5-fold increase in fatalities from terrorist attacks since 9/11. 4 groups are responsible for these. None of them are Christian. These aren't Methodists, who are doing this. It's not the Lutherans doing it. It's not Presbyterians. It's not the Amish. All 4 are Muslim. All 4 are Muslim. Now, I want you to hear what the United Arab Emirates foreign minister had to say about this, about Islam, in a roundtable discussion. Listen to this carefully.
And let me say this in English so you can understand what I'm saying.
I have translation.
No, I know you have translation, but I just want to make sure you get it right. There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
There will come a time where there will be, he says, more Muslim terrorists coming out of Europe than out of the Middle East. And then he goes on to say that basically it's because of Western arrogance, assuming they understand this religion better than that region of the world, the people who live in that region of the world from which it originated. And he says this is ignorance. It's arrogance. It's absolute arrogance. It's fascinating. If I were to ask an educated person, what do you suppose inspired, motivated the kamikazes who were the suicide bombers of, the previous century? What do you suppose motivated them to fly their planes into American ships during the Second World War? An educated person, somebody who knew something about that war, would say, well, it's because they believed in the divinity of their emperor. They were emperor-worshiping feudalistic society who believed that their emperor wanted them to do this. That would be true. In other words, if you asked anyone about the motivation of the kamikazes, they would say, they would properly link those actions with the ideology behind it. But when you ask people, what is the driver behind Islamic terrorist attacks, it's as though people can't make the connection. They can't make the connection with the ideology. And that is because the West The West has absorbed an ideology that is false. As I said, has no doctrine of evil in it. And because of that, the West is ideologically, just doesn't have the intellectual, moral framework to understand these people. And so what is the answer? When these things happen, someone is stabbed in the streets of London, or somebody rapes a bunch of British adolescent girls, or they behead a priest in France, they go, they're crazy. They're crazy. And yet, while that was the narrative post 9/11, that was the claim, little by little, just like the shooter who killed Charlie Kirk, little by little, research has revealed that they weren't crazy. They weren't the oppressed poor of the world. They weren't victims of American imperialism. They weren't poverty-stricken. Not at all. They were educated, reasonably wealthy. Of course, it was funded by those who were extremely wealthy. They were well-trained. They had no misunderstanding about the West. They wanted to destroy it, and they were willing to blow themselves up. And that is because if you are possessed of a secular worldview, then you believe there's pretty much almost nothing worth dying for. And that's because this life is all you get. Muslims don't think that way. And by the way, Christians don't either. Christians should be able to understand better than secularists. We should instinctively be able to understand Muslims, because we too believe there are things worth dying for. We just think they're dying for the wrong things. They're dying for a false God. We believe that there are things worth dying for, but they're real things. They're true things. They're good things. But secularists don't believe that. So when they see someone, dying on behalf of his religion, they go, that guy's nuts. Who do that? That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And thus, they can't make the connection with Islam. Sometime I'll tell you the story on this show of, I visited, and we'll link this article also in the show notes. I visited 13 sites of Islamic terrorist attacks, both in Africa, Europe, the United States. And each of them I went around asking people, some cases shortly after the events. I was at ground zero as a volunteer shortly after the terrorist attack there. But in some cases I was there similarly right after terrorist attacks. And one of them was in Stockholm, Sweden, where a Muslim had taken a beer truck, stolen it, and drove it right down a pedestrian street, fashionable pedestrian district, and just running over men, women, and children who were shopping. And I went from store to store to store all along that boulevard, asking employees and store owners who were witnesses to the attack. And again, I was there maybe 6 weeks after the attack. And I was asking them, do you think Islam had anything to do with this? And they were either too afraid to say, because they don't want to be labeled racist, even though they'd watched right out of their storefronts people being killed by a Muslim who said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, as he did it. They'd say, no, religion didn't have anything to do with it. He was just crazy. He was just crazy. He wasn't crazy. What the 9/11 terrorists did, what the terrorists all over Europe are doing, what they're doing all over North Africa, it isn't crazy. It's perfectly rational within the framework of their worldview, which says that in doing these things, they get eternal life. You must understand this about Islam. You see, in post-Christian Europe, where Rousseau's view of humanity, that is to say that we're born good, has replaced the biblical worldview that you're born evil, speaking lies, says Scripture. It's a concept of original sin. That's Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 21. Read them. Sin entered the world through one man, and redemption also through one man, or those who believed in him, Jesus Christ. But Rousseau's view has slowly conquered the West. And once you arrive at a place like that you believe that people are basically good, it's an inhumane worldview. And you may say, why is that inhumane? To believe that people around me are basically good. Well, first of all, because it's a lie. It's a failure to understand reality. You're living in a fantasy world, but also because when you do encounter truly evil people, you don't understand it as evil. You understand it as some kind of genetic, environmental defect. And people who arrive at that kind of worldview were people like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao. And what did they do? They said, well, we just separate those people out and we destroy them. And once we do that, then everything will be good. Because they fail to understand that evil is in us all. We all carry it. And to come back to my glasses here, your nature, your mind and your heart can be polluted with something that is in itself evil, which will exacerbate the evil within you. It'll make you worse than you might otherwise be. Or it can be filled with something good. And in this case, that's the Christian faith, which will serve not only to give you hope in eternity, but it will sharpen your moral outlook and save you from doing all that you might do to yourself and the people around you. That's what is that's the difference between Islam and Christianity. It's just the difference between Christianity and any other worldview, particularly the kind of stuff that is being pressed upon us from the left. I want to end by reading this to you. It is from an article in Spectator magazine written by John L. Allen, and this is what he has to say. You need to know this. This is what he has to say. According to the International Society for Human Rights, a secular observatory based in Frankfurt, Germany, 80% of all acts of religious discrimination in the world today are directed at Christians. Statistically speaking, that makes Christians by far the most persecuted religious body on the planet. According to the Pew Forum, between 2006 and 2010, Christians face some form of discrimination, either de jure or de facto, in a staggering total of 139 nations. It remains true to this day, which is almost 3/4 of all countries on earth. According to the Center of Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Massachusetts, an average of 100,000 Christians have been killed in what the center calls a situation of witness each year for the past decade. That works out to 11 Christians killed somewhere in the world every hour, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for reasons related to their faith. In effect, the world is witnessing the rise of an entire new generation of Christian martyrs. The carnage is occurring on a scale so vast that it represents not only the most dramatic Christian story of our time, but arguably the premier human rights challenge of this era as well. Not just Charlie Kirk is just the latest. People are dying. Over the course of this show, more than 11 Christians were killed somewhere in the world for their faith. Historian Andrew Hussey says Islam is more like, quote, a ruthlessly efficient war machine rather than a religion. Most of the Christians who are being killed are dying at the hands of Muslims. I've seen it all over Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, let us pray for our Christian brothers and sisters around the world, but let us also find the courage to speak out, the courage to enter the arena having put on the full armor of God and equipped with the truth, not because the truth comes from within us, but because the truth itself is found in God's word and in his person. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton.